When did we go into fear? When did we go into guilt? When did we go into hiding these things? Why are we hiding it? And why aren't we real about these things? So, those are some of the things I like to reflect. So, why is there shame about calling these things out? I really don't believe that was in the way our kupuna had done. And I always kind of go back to Ho'oponopono and how when you get there, you just call it out. There's no question about it. Because they knew that if you didn't get to the root of these things, no sense. There's no real resolvement. There's no real forgiveness. There's no real, it's just not real. You're gonna have a partial rectifying, if that kind of makes sense. It's only a partial. But in our culture, right, here in Hawaii, Kanaka-Oiwi, it was about lokahi. And lokahi, to me, my head goes to Antipilahi Paki and how things are unbroken. It was never separated, things were complete. Yeah, it was not 98%. It was not 99%. It was 100% and then some. Yeah, so to me, you gotta make sure that if you see these things, don't go into fear about it. Yeah, because then that mana, you actually feeding that. Yeah, you're feeding the fear and the doubt into what's really happening before your eyes. You're not gonna see it. You're gonna keep denying it. We gotta stop denying it and speaking it. Yeah, bringing it out so that we don't have to carry that anymore. So that's just kind of where my head goes.
So one of the most common questions that we get, people just want to know the number. How many women and girls? The inquiry is underway, but I would like to cue Lisa and Shaw if you'd like to share a little bit of what we know so far about the extent of the problem in terms of raw numbers and analysis. Lisa?
Okay. Well, I have to turn this on because I have so much I could talk about and I have a lot of notes on it. But simply, there's not enough data, right? So we're waiting for all of the questions that we've developed in the task force. We've put forth to the police departments. We've also asked our community stakeholders, those who are servicing victims and survivors and their families, asking for the data that they have so that we can really get a handle on what's happening and sort of the status part of it. So I want to just mention a couple of things really quickly. So we have service providers, right, that are really in the community servicing and helping the victims, survivors, and their families. And so for some of that data, I'm just going to give you one data point, and one is we have child welfare services. So in 2021, so this is recent data, right, 37% of the child sex trafficking cases reported to CWS, so we keep that in mind, reported, because it goes to what is being talked about, right? When we keep it hidden, right, we don't still see the extent. So 37% of child sex trafficking cases reported were Native Hawaiian. So why is this important? Well, not just the percentage, but when we look at data, we also, so we can see the percentages, and that's important for trends. Frequencies is important to look and see what the status and trends are. But we also want to look at proportionality. When we talk about equity, we want to look at proportionality, right? And so about our youth, they're about 34% of the Native Hawaiian population. As a total of everyone, we are about 21% of the population. And so we can see if you're reporting at 38%, that's higher than what you would have expected in terms of if you were looking at proportions, right, in the community. Another real quick data point, I think, we also have surveys. Many of you might be familiar with the behavioral risk survey, and that shows that there is Native Hawaiian women do report higher levels of intimate partner violence. Why is this important? Because that's the kind of situation that make women and girls vulnerable, right, to becoming missing and murdered in the situations. And maybe just really lastly, there's also police data. And so when we look at police data, we have to be a little bit more careful. As Cara said, we are asking for specific data on missing because we're not sure where that's showing up. There are a couple of places you can look for data. That's the annual crime data. But when we look at that, we can see the categories that everybody's talking about here are not really represented well in that data. And then there's some other new data that's coming out.
Thank you, Shaw. If you just want to briefly add to that.
Sure. I think the sad thing is what she cited as CWS data is almost all we have. There's a legislative report that our department put out, and the thing that I get from legislators is, do we have a problem? Show me the problem. And part of the reason I was hired by AG Connors at the time was you have to invest on the front end in order to identify and show the problem. So this is a population that doesn't identify as victims. They are taught to distrust the system, and for the most part, unfortunately, they should distrust the system. They are preyed on because of their vulnerabilities. So the individuals that are trafficking are counting on the fact that they won't be believed, that they won't be credible. And so I think it's really hard, as Ashley was saying, in terms of looking at the sex industry. Generally, these microphones, generally that's a better idea of quantifying the problem. And I think I even have higher up administrators in my office that are still asking me, do we have a problem? And where we need to be at right now is accepting that we have a problem and trying to address it. And it's not because it's bad, it's just the reality. It's the reality of everywhere has trafficking, but we need to stand up and say it's not going to happen in our community. And I will say, unfortunately, both on the law enforcement side and just as a system, we're not doing that actively enough. And so I think, like with this task force, for instance, it's an investment on the front end to start establishing some of those things, to be proactive, to go out and identify, because none of these individuals are going to come forward and be reporting it. So it's difficult to quantify.
Thank you. And if I may add to that, just so you get a really clear understanding of I cannot overstate how much we are branded as liars. And just maybe 5 or 6 years ago, the belief was that there are only 4 to 6 children who are sex trafficked in Hawaii every year, because they based that data on arresting youth. And then when the federal government had to step in and require a hotline within Child Welfare Services, so that our State Department of Human Services, where mandated reporters, so for example, teachers had to report if they had a credible belief that someone is being victimized, the number was instantly in the 300s.
Yeah.
So, and that is, like Lisa said, probably from everything that we know, the tip of the iceberg. So we're talking about triple digits just for those children who are being sold for commercial gain, having sex with adult men in Hawaii. And the majority of them, the largest proportion, not the majority, but the largest proportion of them, 37% are Native Hawaiian, and the majority of those are girls. So I just wanted to, share how important, I think the term internationally, data genocide. So, the lack of data, because there was no data being supported or funded, is used to say that there's no problem. And all of us here are still grappling with this to this day. So that's very difficult. Moving to root causes. So now we're gonna pivot a little bit to talk about, why. We don't have as much time as I thought we would, so I'm gonna skip around a little bit, folks, bear with me. But according to the massive investigations that were conducted in Canada and some of the inquiries that have happened in other United States, MMIWG has been connected to institutions and vulnerabilities created by colonization. I know some of you might think, yeah, that's a no-brainer, but the very first meeting that we had